First, I want to talk about stand-up as an art form. I think during your act, you talked about, it doesn't really get a lot of respect. Do you feel that personally as a stand-up comic?
Yeah, I feel like stand-up isn't seen as theater. It's seen because I think it's accessible, that almost anyone can do it because it can be done in...
Oh, hold on real quick. I don't know what that noise is. So stand-up you feel isn't respected as much as theater.
Yeah, I feel like stand-up isn't seen as theater. I think because it's so accessible, because it's built for a mainstream audience to hear it, that it can be performed in any kind of venue. Like, I think that accessibility makes it not seem like an art form to people, and it's upsetting, because we value Shakespeare in the society. Shakespeare is such a big deal. Shakespeare was made for everybody. Shakespeare was made for the masses. So it's strange to see how stand-up kind of takes this back seat. It feels like when a comic succeeds and shapes the culture because they're huge stars, then they get respect. But there's a lot of artists along the way who are doing amazing work in every city and town in the country. I think it's an amazing art form, and especially one that's, like I said, accessible, that anybody can share their story to any audience. There's no bar, you don't need to pay your way in. I think that access makes it amazing.
And so do you think stand-up is one of the most democratizing art forms out there? Because the painter has to still buy paints and he has to still buy canvas. But like you said, with the stand-up comic, all they have to do is just write something down.
As an art form, yes. But as an industry, no.
Okay, what ways?
As an art form, anybody can get on stage. Open mics, I've been open mics with homeless people. I've been open mics with kids, people 14, 15 years old, because if it's a free open mic, you show up. It doesn't matter what your economic situation is or who you are. You have something to say, and you say it into a microphone, and it's amazing. But I think that with the industry, it's different. Just like any other industry, you think about who's going to sell tickets, who's going to make money. It's not who will sell tickets, who will make money. It's who do I think based on what I've seen in the past. I think it ends up becoming you see issues along racial lines, along gender lines. You see that kind of discrimination that you see in any other industry. I think you see that with comedy, because the one difference is laughs kind of rule. If you make people laugh, you'll get work. But I think in terms of you need to be in a position to succeed. You need to have better rooms. You have to be able to have access to better shows. You have to have people see you, and I think that's where it gets tricky as industry.
And that was very frustrating for me. Columbus isn't, the comedy scene has grown a lot since I stopped. Did it for about 5 years, went to college, and then I kind of stopped doing jokes. But I kind of noticed that, I noticed it a lot, because they had certain gatekeepers a part of certain clubs. He didn't like me personally, so that kind of limited me getting on stage.
Yeah.
And so, this is at the Funny Bone Comedy Club.
Well, especially if there's only one club.
And that's true,
right.
Yeah.
If you have a bunch of different clubs, and if you have people making their own rooms, which in terms of democratizing, I'm not going to succeed through this system, I'll just make my own room and I'll try to get, a base there. And I think that's amazing, the idea of I want to make art, I don't care how I make this art. If I was getting paid to do this, if I was doing this as a hobby like I did when I started, I'd still do it. This is my art form, this is how I write, this is how I think.
Yeah.
Industry aside, as an art form, it's a microphone, hopefully, and a stage, hopefully. That's all you need. Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of production values, it's so low, and people are still compelled to do it and to watch.
Yeah. And going off of that, what you said before, even if you weren't doing this professionally, you would still do it. So what does stand-up do for you, emotionally and spiritually?
I think the rush of being on stage for me is still unparalleled. That feeling of being able to make people laugh, and especially on the terms I want them to laugh at. You can't guarantee that, but I'm I want to be very clear with my point of view, and I want people to understand where I'm coming from. And if they're laughing, that means that they either understand what I'm saying personally, or they understand my point of view on it. It's a powerful feeling. I think for a lot of people, like I was saying before, who, I understand that people find like stand-up oppressive, and they'll go to a club and they feel like it's they're hearing all these awful things being said to them, and I get that. But at the same time, it's like that's not stand-up's fault. That's a bigger issue that has to do with mainstream culture. What issues do you see in mainstream culture, in films and in other TV and stuff that doesn't reflect the problem with television and film as forms? It has to do with like our society being poisoned culturally. That's different. So stand-up, because it has such a low bar to entry, and because you can say whatever you want, especially for people of color and women and members of the LGBTQ community, it's like if you can make people laugh, it's empowering right off the bat. And also, especially now more than ever, you can build your own followings.
Yeah.
You don't need the traditional club system. You don't need the industry in the way it has historically been built off the top, right? You can immediately, create a base and do your own thing.
And earlier you brought up a point that people feel kind of like angry at stand-up, or because I guess what people are saying, they're saying it's more so with the culture. And I kind of noticed this change back when I was doing stand-up around 2005 and stuff like that. It was very abrasive. You had like the Carlson Sia kind of attitude, and now I kind of see. I feel like the quality of the most successful comics has gotten a lot better. I know it kind of is like a pendulum. I feel like a little bit.
I think it also reflects society in a lot of ways. I think like people are more thoughtful with a lot of ideas and language. I think also there's more of a pushback, at least I think, between the people who create art and the people who receive art. Before it was like you make it and it shapes an audience and you're kind of reflecting what you see in society, but at the same time, you still had, I think, a bit more control. Now you have instant feedback, whether Twitter or other things. You have people who are able to create their own art on the internet. You have, in some ways, more you have more voices, more competition, more like people forcing you to keep up. It's not just 2 or 3 places where you can see comedy or film or TV anymore. You can see it in a whole bunch of places, and I don't need to watch you if I don't want to. And as a result of that, I think people are more likely to try to keep up. Like I want, whenever I hear people say, I don't like performing at colleges because kids are too politically correct, and it's like, to me, it's like that's every generation.
Yeah.
Once you start thinking that, you've gotten too old to play.
Oh wow.
And to me, it feels like if you want to actually make art that's relevant, you need to know where people are at, and you have to reach them where they're at to the best of your ability. And I feel like that's something that I've tried to do.
That's a really good point too. I remember they like VH1 brought Andrew Dice Clay back from the back for a TV show or whatever, and it's like now, like I said, I don't see that happening at all. And I remember that another comment made about that they don't want to play colleges and there's too many SJWs and all this kind of stuff. And you played a room that would get criticized as being too many SJWs. You got to walk on eggshells and all this kind of stuff. But you killed. You did a wonderful set, and you were very critical. You poked fun at even the audience, and so it is possible. Like you said, maybe the artist is just
and it's more possible when more people come out with a broader range of points of view. I mean, like the crowd performed for yesterday, clearly was going to be on my side, and it went as well as it could. That's not universal. But it is to say that if you had that audience going to other shows and supporting other artists who are doing great work, that's part of what shapes culture, right? It's like, people want this. People are sharing this. People are making sure other people have access to this kind of stuff. I mean, that's crucial. And also, I think that that's not going to be every show.
Yeah.
And what's offensive to one person is not offensive to another person. Sometimes people will say, I like your comedy because it's not offensive, which I don't agree with. I think it is offensive depending on who you are.
Yeah.
To you, it is not offensive. To somebody else who does not like my values at all, it is offensive. It offends their sensibility. They'll walk out, they'll yell, they'll write something. I mean, that's what's expected. So I think the abrasiveness of comedy, I think, is acceptable. It really is about the context you bring and who you're talking to.
Yeah, and I even struggle to find the right words to talk about this as well, because like abrasive doesn't mean, like you said, you had a lot of material that a lot of people would find abrasive, but still, it was very thoughtful and made people think, and it was accurate. But like, so you say,
some audiences don't like that.
Oh, and that's
some audiences don't like. They don't think it's accurate, and they don't. They don't like my point of view, and they don't like my tone, and they come for a Saturday night to see comedy. They don't know what comedy means exactly, and they don't know what I do. They get a babysitter, they come out for a date, and I'm up there yelling about colonialism. Like, I can understand that frustration. This isn't what I expected. And, do I think that we should be in a world where we talk about those sorts of things? Yes, but I also understand we're in a world where people don't always want to hear it, or people don't know. And what my job is to be as funny as possible, while not, I never want to compromise my point of view and compromise my beliefs, but to be as funny as possible within that context, to reach as many people as possible.
So I guess is my critique kind of wrong? Is this like, are comics on an equal plane as far as like, if a comic says something that a lot of people find disfavorable, or I don't know if I'm even saying it right. You know what I'm saying? I guess like compared to the
I think that it's like
punching on minorities versus.
You have to see it in different ways, right? Like, my personal belief is that you have to punch upwards, right? You have to go after who has power. I think that's where the difficulty is, that's where the righteousness is, and that's how I'm going to view it. But as an art form, it's all equal. You know what I mean? That's just how it is. It's all equal, and it's up to the people consuming the art to make a choice, whether it's something they want to support with their laughs, support with their money, support with their presence. That's where it's, because the rest of it is values. Like, I know what my values are. I have a feeling I know what the values of most people in this room are. But, I think to simply say that is lesser than because X, Y, Z, that's the criticism I get. I would rather you, if you're going to do that, also support artists that you do value. Because at the end of the day, we're putting one thing on a pedestal and then something else off the pedestal. That's great, but that's just one person's opinion. If you really want to back that, support that artist, share that artist.
Yeah.
Go see that artist. Like, if you want to create change and create a society that's more just, it's not just talking shit about like this, this is not good, but this is good. Everybody thinks one thing is good and something else, but that doesn't mean anything. Everybody has a different set of values. And just like with, I think, social justice movements, telling somebody they're wrong isn't going to do it. It's convincing them you're right.
Yeah.
And that requires a lot of respect and a lot of dialogue and a lot more critical conversation that's honest. And I don't always think that ranking and saying, I think it's one conversation when it's just, I have opinions, sharing your opinions is what I think, but I don't think, but if the point of it is to get as many people as possible on board, I don't think it's effective.
Okay. Yeah, that's a brilliant point, like, especially when you said, like, punching up.
Yeah.
Because, like, before, the wave was kind of like punching down and then beating up on certain groups, and it's like making fun of the stereotypes.
I think it's still the case.
It's still okay.
It's still the case. I mean, I feel like in these circles, you're not going to see this often. But yeah, it's still the case. I think comics like me who are trying to create certain types of art form that is uncomfortable. We're going upstream. And still, it's not like everything's laid out for us all of a sudden. I mean, this country isn't necessarily the easiest place to talk critically about race and class and gender in most of the country. Like, I'm not. This is a leftist conference in Chicago. Like, I'm not playing this every single show.
Yeah.
So I think that I wouldn't say that this is the majority and this is the wave. I think this is a wave. This is a group of people that have felt empowered as a result of the internet, being exposed to more things, building their own base, and people also just becoming more conscious in general.
Yeah.
It might not be where we all want it to be, but it's certainly much further along than a decade ago, and as a performer, I see that. So I definitely think that like there is certainly more of a movement to create critical art and critical comedy that is funny. If it's not funny, it's a comedy. It's worthless. You know, it's not about saying things that are righteous. It's saying things that are righteous and your point of view and funny. If it's not funny, it's a complete waste.
And you brought a point of view earlier. So, I mean, being a child of immigrants, I mean, how has your point of view helped you see things within American culture that other people haven't seen?
Sure. I mean, certainly understanding what it's like when you're an immigrant and you're trying to raise Americans, that's difficult. You know, I saw like places where we didn't understand, me and my folks didn't understand each other, or we had tough times communicating an idea, or you know, they felt frustrated that they didn't go to schools here, they didn't have those experiences. You know, I grew up in Queens, so I also know what it's like to grow up in a majority-minority place, and the fact that this country fears immigrants, and I grew up around immigrants. Like, I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens. Like, you know, that's maybe the most diverse part of the most diverse place in the world. And, you know, that was my norm, and I know the rest of the country basically fears this country turning into Queens. And as somebody who's had the privilege of, you know, growing up with immigrant parents and being around immigrants, I know what that means. And I know that it's not scary, and I know that I've been enriched, and I didn't know what the word diversity meant, because why would I call a thing like that out? Because I grew up with it.
Right.
When you have it, it's not something to be named. It is what it is. It's life. Yeah.
And so I guess with such backlash against immigrants happening right now, I mean, you've seen a lot of children of immigrants, comedians, get more notoriety.
Sure.
So that's that weird kind of juxtaposition happening now. I mean, what do you think? What's going on here?
I think it's a generation that feels more comfortable stepping outside of just making money, but creating art and creating stuff that. You know, this is a generation that was influenced by comedy, and certainly with the internet has been. This is outside just like children of immigrants, has been exposed to more comedy, and it feels more accessible. So I think that's part of it as well. And the idea of building your own following, you feel like I can build something even if they don't let me in. Before, when I was in high school, the thought was they're not going to let me in, they're not going to give me a chance, so why bother? I'll just do it for me. But things are different now.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly a part of it. And you know, you see it from like Twitter campaigns. Twitter campaigns. Like, not only indicate that this is a platform that can get a lot of people activated, it also shows there's a lot more people than I thought were activated. And I feel like that's part of this. And also, I think some of it's maybe more cynical, or maybe more realistic, is that like I think people with money realize, oh, these people can bring in money, and so the idea of diversity is not. An act of charity. It's not kindness.
Yeah.
It's capitalist. It's utilitarian for the purposes of capitalism. What's going to make us the most money? And this base of people has money. There's enough of these people. We're going to make money. By supporting this person. Like that's the most cynical way of looking at it. But that is certainly part of it. Do I think it's all of it? No, I'm not that cynical. I do think that if you make interesting art and unique art, people will find it. But when you have that money behind you, I think it's not just that. So yeah, I think that's certainly a shape too. And you have a generation of people who are in positions of power who've grown up with South Asians. They've grown up watching black folks at least minimally on TV, and hip hop culture being such a big thing. Whether or not that makes them a politically active and aware and thoughtful person who thinks about the greater context of the world, that's not clear. It at least means that they're willing to broaden their horizons culturally, and that they can see more than white faces on a screen.
Yeah.
That's not universal, but there's more of it. There's more of it where I can exist, and there's so many other artists I love that exist.
Right, absolutely. I guess, so ending on these final questions, what was that moment like transitioning from, I guess, a regular person to being a successful comic? Like, because doing this channel, one thing that occurred to me, I interview a lot of local artists and people who are attorneys, whether they once were professional athletes, but they have great artwork. It's like they're not household names, they're not famous, but their work is incredible. So like, looking at the working class artist is something that I love doing with this channel. And so like when you were transitioning out of your normal job into this, like what was that moment that told you that I could do this full-time or professional?
I mean, I wouldn't call myself a working class artist just because I feel like, I grew up with enough privilege where that would be bullshit for me to say. Even when I was broke and I decided to do comedy full-time, I'm still living with my folks.
Yeah.
Like that's not a working class artist. I had food and shelter provided to me. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't claim that about myself.
Okay.
But I will say that, my path was more gradual. I did stand-up because I love doing stand-up. And I was an immigrant rights organizer. I worked with refugees. I worked with folks being detained and deported and victims of hate crimes. And that's the work I did. And I did comedy at night, as I had done in high school and college. I had done it at night when I was living in Seattle as an organizer because I loved doing stand-up. And so for me, I was always going to do stand-up. I think the part that was tricky is when I decided to do it full-time, I needed it also as an income source. And that's the difference, in addition to if you keep doing it and you get successful, you have people that actually listen carefully and value the work. But initially it was man, I never had to worry about money with this. I did this because I loved it. And now I have to find a way to make money. And that also might mean that if I piss certain people off, they won't hire me again. And am I okay with that? Am I okay with that? And I was okay with it. It also meant maybe I had a slower start once I decided to really go head on. I was off to a quick start when I was a hobbyist. I got a manager. I was on TV when I was just doing it as a hobby. But when I did it full time, oh no, I got to get booked for things, and I have to show up places and audition for this. This wasn't the world I was a part of until it became a real thing, until I was told that it was open to me. So I think that was the hardest thing. It was realizing that now this is also something that has to put food on the table. That changes it, I think this is obvious, but capitalism changes art.
That's right.
You have to fight against it, but it's certainly, you could be, and I'm not somebody who is so holy where I'm going to say that capitalism can't work for me, in terms of getting this art out there, but it means that I'm going to have to turn down things. What I mean capitalism works for me, that means we have a critical mass of people who are willing to spend money, and so people have to put us on stage because they know there's income coming in, and they can't deny that.
Exactly.
It's allowed me to say well, you don't need to put me on your show, but I'm going to take these 500 people and go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take these 100,000 or 50,000, whatever people on these social networks, and I'm going to go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. That gave me a degree of power, as it does any artist. And so, for me, that was the tricky part, is I have to think of this in terms of how do I make money, and I have to think of it still in terms of how do I be true to myself, and that balance. I didn't need to worry about balance before. Mm-hmm. Who cared? Now I got to think more about balance just in terms of not in terms of balancing the art. The art should be untouched, but how do I turn that into something that I can actually support myself with.
So this is kind of like a balancing act where you didn't want to compromise your art form.
Yeah.
And so you had to take a couple sacrifices in order to do that, but in the end,
yeah,
you stuck to it.
I feel pretty good about, for the most part, not sacrificing my art. Certainly it means that the time period is longer. It's not like I just popped, It's I'm 34 years old and I've been working at this.
Yeah.
And there's no bitterness. I chose, what I wanted to do. I wouldn't do anything else. I can't be upset that, it took forever for me to make critical art about race and gender and class and sexuality. I didn't think that was going to be a big hit from the get-go. I knew it was challenging, so I can't be upset that, it took forever. It's taking forever because it's supposed to. These movements take forever. So I'm not saying I'm a movement, but I'm saying that when you talk in, about those kinds of things, you're not going to win people over immediately.
Right.
It's gradual, and I accept that.
That's definitely true.
Yeah.
And so we can end right there.
Hey, thanks.
Got a lot of time.
I appreciate that, man.
Thank you so much, Hardy.
Yeah, for sure.
It was great.